Welcome everyone. So I'm going to start off by telling you what I'm not going to tell you. So in this session today, I want it to be quite a practical session. So I'm not going to tell you the statistics around absenteeism, and I'm not going to tell you about how many people are off with musculoskeletal problems, because I don't think that that's particularly useful to you. What I want to do is to hopefully send you away with some thoughts and some ideas of what you guys might be able to do in your own work areas to try and reduce absenteeism. We're not going to turn you into an ergonomics and human factors specialist in the next half hour, but I really do think we can make a start to help you understand what sort of things you can do and the sorts of things to look out for as well. Now, for 15 years, I was the Ergonomics and Human Factors Specialist in a local NHS trust, and it was a job that I did really love. But as you can see from the picture up there, I was often known by another title, which was the chair lady. And I had very mixed feelings about this title. So Ergonomics and Human Factors Advisor was my official title. And Ergonomics and Human Factors, which are interchangeable terms, is all about people. So I never expect people to know what ergonomics and human factors is, but it's about people. It's about understanding people, understanding their anatomy, their physiology, their anthropometry, which is all about your body sizes, psychology, and our thought process, our cognitive elements, understanding how people interact with others, how they behave, how they make decisions. And using all of that information about people, it helps us to understand how we work alongside colleagues, how we undertake the tasks that we do every day at work, how we interact with the equipment that we're supposed to be using, how we interact with our environments, our working environments. Because if we don't think about the human when we're designing these things, we can very, very easily get it wrong. And I've seen numerous examples of equipment that's really hard to use, or buttons positioned in really awkward places, and people press the wrong thing. We've got a classic example of an anaesthetic machine where the on-off button was positioned right by the suction, and the button for turning the suction on and off was right at the other end. When you look at these things in isolation, you think, oh my goodness, how could that have happened? But it did. And what we're doing there is setting people up to fail. So I think the absence of good ergonomics and human factors is going to cause people to trip up and make mistakes, or it's going to result in them working in awkward postures or doing really repetitive tasks, which can, over time, lead to things like musculoskeletal problems. If we think about the people, if we think about them when we're designing our tasks, when we're designing our equipment or our environments, we can really set things up so that we support people to work as best they can. We can support them to work safely, efficiently, and ultimately we're looking after our humans, but we're also looking after our systems as well. So the breadth of human factors and ergonomics is what made me think, oh, the chair lady, it's narrowing me so much. There is so many things that you can do with ergonomics and human factors. But on the other hand, I did really enjoy my chairs. I had a whole storeroom full of different chairs that I could loan out to people. And chairs, you might think of them as being really simple pieces of equipment. We interact with them numerous times a day. You're sitting on one now, and you have been for the morning session. But what I've seen time and time again over the hospital is how changing seating, either to a different style or making sure that it fits people, having appropriate seating, can hugely impact people at work. Now, I had to be really, really careful as an ergonomics and human factors advisor to not be that person that went into an environment, made loads of really good recommendations, and then handed the manager a huge bill at the end to implement those recommendations. We don't have any money in the NHS. We never have done. We probably never will. And it's not really very practical to expect managers to shell out for new, fancy, expensive equipment. And most of the time, we actually didn't necessarily need to. So thinking about our chairs, I've seen so many areas where there's actually some really nice chairs, but people don't realise that they're really good. They might have been squirreled away, or, well, that chair was bought for so-and-so, but she's not here anymore, so don't really know what to do with it. Actually, could you think about changing the chairs around and giving it to somebody who would benefit from it? So you might be surprised when it comes to chairs, but also other equipment, that there might be some really good stuff already in your department that you don't necessarily know about. I've also had examples of where people have been lucky enough to have new chairs, and they've phoned me up feeling quite sheepish because they know they've been quite lucky to get this chair, but it's not very comfortable. Help. They don't want to admit to their manager that they've had this new chair bought for them. It's not very comfortable. Usually, in those situations, the chair is fine, but when it comes, it's squashed down to the smallest it can possibly be, and that's not actually going to suit many people. These people are often too scared to press any of the levers or have a go. They think they're going to break the chair. I am one of the clumsiest people around, and I haven't yet managed to break a chair. So I don't mind getting on my hands and knees and having a go and just playing with the chair, seeing what it will do. People are really scared to do that. And often the people who do have a go at altering the chairs say to me, but I don't know what I'm trying to achieve. I know this bit goes up and down, and I know I've got height adjustable arms, and this bit changes the angle, but I don't know what I'm doing. So sometimes just some really basic information and education about how to alter a chair, taking them through, for example, the back height settings, so taking it all the way down to the bottom and then clicking it up bit by bit and getting the person to sit back every click and try to feel whether it's more comfortable than the previous setting. And that helps people to understand what they're trying to achieve. It helps people to understand what it's like when the chair back's too low, when it's about the right height, and then when it's too high. So often, people are just a bit scared. And then the last tip that I would have about chairs is that I've seen lots and lots of chairs in corridors with big signs on saying, broken, please take away. What I would suggest you do before you discard the chair is have a look underneath it and have a look at the manufacture date, because usually we have 5 to 10 years of guarantee on chairs, and the number of chairs I've seen that have been about to be thrown away that are still within guarantee, so we might be able to get them repaired or replaced. Or I have people wobbling their arms and saying, my chair's broken, the arms are wobbly. They do wobble after a while, but there's nothing really that a good set of Allen keys can't fix. So, get your Allen keys out, tighten the arms up, and people will probably be a bit happier. So, the label chair lady probably wasn't my ideal label, but I did get quite excited about them because it can make such a difference to how people feel at work. And that might seem, a small thing, but actually, I can't say how many people I've reduced going off sick, but there's an awful lot of people anecdotally who've said, I was about to go off sick, but actually, since we've changed my workstation around, since we've made these adaptations, I felt so much more comfortable at work. And I do think there are many times when we have prevented people from going off sick simply by altering their chair in some form or another. So in healthcare, we have a huge variety of working environments, and you may well recognise some of the ones up here. They all come with their challenges, and they always will come with their challenges, but that's not to say that we can't do something about them. What I want to give you is some basic principles that I hope you can take away to try and start to look at and understand your work areas from a slightly different perspective. And not look at them in the way that you always look at them, but to actually start to pick out some of the potential problems. As an ergonomics and human factors advisor, I'm always looking with those eyes. I'm always looking at pictures like the workstation up there thinking, well, that's terrible, isn't it? She's not sitting on a proper chair. Her laptop screen is too low. It all looks very nice, but actually that's a terrible workstation. I'm looking at trolleys, I'm looking at how many doors people have to go through, what are their postures when they're going through doors. So, you may start to look at those and think, yeah, we have that in our working environment as well. So one of the most valuable things in my ergonomics and human factors toolbox are my eyes. Ergonomics and human factors is great for the curious people because you can go and watch and look and learn so much from people working. When I moved into healthcare 20 years ago, I came from the nuclear industry, and I was really concerned that I would struggle because I didn't have a clinical background. My background is purely ergonomics and human factors. And I thought, well, how am I going to get on not knowing the ins and outs of an operating theatre or how a ward works? But actually, I learnt really quickly that instead of that being a disadvantage, it actually worked in my favour many times and continues to do so, because I went into these areas with no preconceived ideas. I had no idea how things should work or how they've always worked. So I could go in and use my eyes and just look and take in what was happening on face value. You can learn an awful lot by doing so. If it's an environment in which you're familiar with, you have got to kind of take that step back and look quite objectively to really just think, what's going on here? So I've spent hours and hours watching and learning. And one of the things that's really interesting to always remember is the difference between work as imagined and work as done. So over time, we all start to develop mental models of different people's jobs, and you're probably starting to develop one about my own job. You know, chair lady, loves her chairs, loves being nosy, going into working environments. And some of those elements are probably true. But work as imagined doesn't give you the full picture. Your work as imagined may be based on the time that you did that job, which may be quite some time ago. Things might have moved on since then. You may have a model in your mind as to what's happening because you've read the SOPs and you understand the procedures. Is that going to tell you everything about the job? It will certainly tell you something, but it won't necessarily tell you about the workarounds or the things that have been adapted. So whilst you think you might know what's going on, there's no substitute for actually going down into a work area, using your eyes and watching the messy reality of work. Watching the interruptions, watching on really busy days, watching on really quiet days, watching on days when they're short-staffed or the equipment isn't working. So use your eyes to really see what's going on. The other thing that's really important, and these may sound really obvious, but there's some really good key principles, is to talk to people. So as I said, I have the advantage of being able to go in and ask the seemingly silly questions because I don't know what's supposed to happen. So I can go in somewhere and say, oh, I've never seen this before, tell me more. That's interesting. Can you tell me why you do that or what the process is? And if people understand what you're there to do, they will often tell you loads, but it is really key to put people at ease and to help them understand why you're there and what you're doing. When I used to go into working environments, if people didn't know who I was and their manager had just said, oh, Fran's coming to watch you, immediately people would think, oh, crikey, who is she, what's she doing, and what's going to happen? The number of times people ask me, are you from HR? Are you going to tell them that I can't do my job? Absolutely not. So very quickly, I had to put people at ease and say, no, I'm here to understand what you do, understand what your challenges are, and together we can help make this more comfortable, safer, and more efficient. That helps people to feel at ease. And once they feel at ease and understand what you're there for, they will often tell you quite a lot. Some of it you don't need to know, but actually just that chatter, those thoughts, that explanation can be hugely, hugely valuable. Don't be afraid to ask those really seemingly basic questions. A number of years ago, I had a call from somebody who asked me to go and look at their workstation because they said, I just don't have enough space. So I went along, looked at the workstation, kind of scratched my head a bit and thought, no, they don't have much space, do they? I wonder why she's got 2 computers on her desk. Maybe I'll just ask her. And I said, oh, yeah, you are really short on space. Can I just ask, why do you have 2 computers on the desk? Because that really feels like it's the problem. And at that moment, She looked so sheepish and said, "Oh, do you know what? I don't know. I arrived on my first day. I was told to turn on the computer on the left, and I've never touched the one on the right since." But she had become so blind to that computer that she just didn't realise that it was part of her workstation, and that was the problem. And I know this sounds like a bit of a far-fetched or unlikely example, but it's absolutely true. People do become blind to their workstation, and sometimes just some simple questions can really help people to take that objective view and help them to look at their workstation in a slightly different way. So talking to people, positively explore the workarounds that people have done. People are always going to adapt their work, and sometimes we can look at that quite negatively and we can think, oh, they're just trying to find a shortcut. They don't want to follow procedure, so they're finding different ways of doing things. Most of the time, people will implement workarounds because what they are supposed to be doing just isn't working for them. Maybe by following the procedure, it's unrealistic. Maybe the piece of equipment that's been referred to isn't working, or it's no longer around. Maybe the procedure is reflecting an ideal scenario where you're fully staffed, but that just never happens. So generally, people are trying to implement workarounds because they want to work better and they want to work more efficiently. It may not be the ideal solution that they have implemented. It may not work long term, but always positively explore it. Try and understand their rationale. And also, I do think it's worth applauding ingenuity as well, because people are often striving to make things better. And that is something that should be encouraged. Trial changes. Once you have looked, you've observed, you've spoken to people, you may well come up with things that you might want to change. That could be something like rewriting a procedure so that it's in a flowchart format rather than really wordy. It might be changing around a task so people have more task rotation, so they're not doing really repetitive tasks for long periods of time. It might be bringing in a new piece of equipment. There are all sorts of things that you think, actually, this might be worth giving a go. Always worth trialling changes because we don't always hit upon the right solution first time round. Something that sounds really good on paper or in discussion might just not work or be quite as effective as we want when we trial it. It's often worth, when you're buying new equipment, to trial as well. The number of times people think, I need to change the seating, we're back to seating. I need to change the seating, so I'll look through the catalogue and, oh, that one looks good. So I'll order 20 of those and everybody should be happy. Generally, not everyone is happy because we are all so different. So one size does not fit all. I had a call from a phlebotomy team in an outpatient department, and we had a really motivated team and a brilliant manager. And the team had said to the manager, we're starting to get musculoskeletal niggles and we think the seating is to blame. And they were sitting on stools with no backs. And for anyone who sat for any length of time on that kind of chair, very quickly you start to get into this sort of position. In order to get some kind of back support, they'd shuffle the way back and lean against the wall, and that was their back support. So the manager could understand what the issue was and thought, okay, yep, we can afford some seating, so let's get Fran in and we'll do an assessment. What the manager had initially thought was, well, we'll just buy one type of seating and then that will be fine, everyone will be happy. But what we did was we trialled different chairs and different types of seating. And the staff absolutely loved this because, firstly, they felt heard. They felt like their manager had really listened to them and was really taking what they were saying seriously and taking their risk of developing musculoskeletal problems really seriously. So they loved trialling these chairs. Now, unsurprisingly to me, they all liked different ones. It's always the case, always the case. But that manager said, okay, I appreciate that through a trial, we are going to have to buy a range of different chairs, and people could then pick what they want. It's a big department. Hopefully if we buy 4 or 5 different types, we can hit upon one for everybody. Whilst that might seem more laborious, it might seem more expensive, it was better in that manager's mind to do that than to just blank order from a catalogue 5, 6, 7 chairs and find that people didn't use them because they weren't comfortable. One of the nice things about trialling was that the staff really bought into the idea of making changes. They felt listened to and they felt part of the solution. And from a morale perspective, that was huge, absolutely huge to them. Lots of companies, when it comes to equipment, will let you trial things, particularly if it's some expensive equipment. Most companies appreciate, particularly when it comes to sort of more ergonomic type equipment, that one size doesn't fit all. So it's always worth approaching a company and saying, could we trial something? Or could you come in and help us to identify a solution? Many companies will offer this kind of service, but they don't necessarily advertise it, and they don't necessarily push it because it's a free service. But always explore that. Always approach companies and say, can we have some help? The same happened in a sonography department. Sonographers are well known for experiencing musculoskeletal problems. They get into some terrible postures, and they often don't realise the sorts of postures they're in because they're so focused on getting a good image, they're so focused on making sure the patient is okay, that they have no idea that they're in really difficult and tricky postures. And there they wanted to change the couch, but that was quite a big investment for them. So instead of just making a decision based on a picture on a website, they asked the company whether they could actually trial something. They did, and they realised actually that's not what we need and that's not what we want. And in the end, they changed the seating instead of the couch. So they could have spent a lot of money unnecessarily. And the last tip is, please don't worry if you trial something and it's not right. You will never hit upon the right answer first time, every time. So please don't be disheartened. I've loaned equipment to people thinking, well, somebody else with that same condition has used that piece of equipment really successfully, so this should be the right thing to try, only to find that it's not. And again, that's a reminder that we're all different. So don't be disheartened if you try something and think, we're going to have to go back to the drawing board. There will always be some learning from that trial. You will always learn from what has worked as well as what hasn't worked, and you can build on there and from there to try the next thing. Sometimes those things are off-the-shelf ideas, but sometimes we really have to scratch our heads and get to the drawing board and think of something different and new. So somebody called me very sheepishly and said, would you mind coming to have a look at our workstation? But please don't shout at us. And I walked in and I saw this and I said, that is brilliant. Really? She said. Absolutely. I can see from that workstation that you've identified a problem. You've had a discussion as a team and you've identified a possible solution. I knew that they weren't seeing this as a long-term solution, but they were trialling something. So this was a workstation, a hot desk workstation used by lots of different people, different heights, and it just really wasn't working. And so they got their heads together and said, what can we do with this workstation to make it better? What can we do to make it more comfortable? And some of the staff suggested that they would quite like to stand whilst they were working. And at the time, sit-stand desks weren't as common as they are now, and they were quite expensive. So what they did was found some boxes and mocked up a workstation to have a go. And what they found was that quite a few of the staff really enjoyed standing whilst they were working. And that gave them the confidence to say, it is worth spending the money on a sit-stand desk. But they were embarrassed by this. They thought I was going to shout at them for creating this workstation. But absolutely not. These people had identified a problem and they'd had a go. And I think that is a wonderful thing to do, and that should absolutely be encouraged. Because I think we generally want to try and make things better. And this is a picture of my niece from this summer. She was on holiday. She was baking hot and she didn't know what to do with herself. So she decided the only thing to do was to get in the paddling pool and watch her tablet. But quite instinctively, she found the washing up bowl, she found the draining rack, and she set herself up a nice little workstation so she could sit nice and cool and she could see her tablet, and she was comfortable. It was in easy reach, but it also wasn't going to fall in the paddling pool. So I think often we are just trying to find different ways. And whilst they may not be the perfect solution, we absolutely have to start somewhere. And I think anywhere, if we start at the beginning and just try and make some small changes, that's a really, really positive place to be. So I think this quote sums it up nicely, really. You know, start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. Might not be perfect first time round, but have a go and see what impact you can make on absenteeism in your workplaces. So thank you.